Salvage by Rantarian. Chapter 2. Food. Ever since he had woken up, Adrian Saunders had been hungry. The gray alien woman, she had introduced herself as Triafa and her race as Kortai, had provided him with an ample supply of meal tablets that were commonly used for space travelers. They were bland and offered little in the way of gastronomic satisfaction, but he'd spent enough time in the Middle East eating all sorts of things that made bland seem like a real treat. After a week of eating several hundred of the things, he would have just about killed for a battered salve or a good pub parma, maybe with a beer. "You can't tell me you fucking like these things," he once complained to Triafa when she brought his first dozen for the morning. "The first couple aren't bad, but you have to admit the rest could use a bit of flavour. Maybe a bit of tomato sauce?" "The rest of us only require a single tablet per meal," Triafa said disapprovingly. "You are merely a gluttonous species." Adrian really couldn't argue with that, although he'd never felt like he'd ever simply been eating for eating's own sake. If good food had ever defined his life, it was in its absence, and aside from too much horse meat while deployed or too many burnt sausages in his youth, he'd never really had much cause to miss it. Food was just a way to quieten his belly after a long and hard day. He really did miss the tomato sauce, though. "So how am I, anyway?" he asked Triafa. "You've kept taking tests, but I'm feeling shitloads better than I ever have. Might be just my imagination, but I reckon I might have put on a bit of muscle as well." "You have," Triafa told him. "The medicine has worked better than we had imagined, and your body has been busy optimizing itself, hence the extra muscle and your brand new ribcage. Normally, I would have to fabricate a replacement, but you managed to create your own." The things she was saying were good news, Adrian was sure, but her tone was terse and displeased. That was the sort of tone that someone took before they started telling you the bad news, like the good was supposed to mitigate the bad by being said first. Adrian had always been a tell me the bad news first kind of guy. In his opinion, it was the only way to stay sane when the good news was bad and the bad news was truly fucked up. At least then you could end on a note of, it could have been worse. "What are you telling me, Doc?" he asked. "This stuff going to end up giving me cancer?" Triafa appeared to consider the possibility for a moment. "No," she said. "It is unlikely, but your body is inuring you to other chemicals, beneficial or otherwise. If you are hurt again, we do not have enough painkillers in stock to deaden the sensation. Your caloric requirements have also risen, and we may soon need to ration you heavily so that the rest of us do not starve to death." "So I get to starve instead?" he asked. He was somewhere between bitter and alarmed. Bitter that he may soon be forced to go very hungry, and alarmed that his own eating habits were threatening the crew in general. "Is there something I can do?" Again, Triafa appeared to consider his question. "Perhaps, but I will need to run it past Beckmer. I know he was intending to ship in more food, but as his has already been sent to collect more medical supplies. With more crew, we might have undertaken a crop growth plan, but with your demanding diet, I doubt the standard plans would have supplied us in any case." "What about my imprisonment in this luxury?" he asked sardonically, gesturing to the sparse medical bay. "Don't mind telling you that if I have to sit around here much longer, I'm going to end up going Burko." Triafa looked puzzled as the translator tried to find a matching translation and then gave up. "Berserk? Mad? Bloody crazy?" Adrian supplied helpfully. He'd already discovered that his typical idioms generally translated bizarrely, and had tried to avoid them when he wanted to make himself understood. It hadn't mattered during his deployment, since he usually didn't need to speak the language of wherever he happened to be in bumfuck nowhere, and the density of his Australian slang usually ensured that even if the folks did happen to speak English, they remained completely ignorant as to what he'd just said. That had been often for the best. A look of worry flashed over her face, and she nodded. "I will see what Beckmer says." "Continue investigating," Beckmer told his two technicians. "I don't like being denied access to anywhere in our new ship, and we need to ensure everything has been catalogued before we sell it. You never know if there's another fortune just laying around somewhere." Crick and Merca gestured their compliance, ready to go about their business after delivering their report. They were rarely seen outside of mealtimes, and spent most of their time working on hardware while Beckmer worked on software. Normally, he would have Triafa for help on that, and to act as a go-between to ensure everything was working properly. But while she was busy attending the human, that was impossible. "You still need to prioritize repair," Beckmer called after them as Triafa joined him. "I don't want anything falling back into pieces because you were trying to get through a door." "Problem with a door?" asked Triafa as they left. "Exploratory efforts continue," Beckmer replied, taking to his command seat once again. "Where possible, anyway." Perhaps we could get the human to lend assistance, Trialpha suggested. He has told me that if he doesn't get work, he intends to willfully turn psychotic. Beckmer blinked. Can they do that? He asked, then shook his head in a surprisingly human gesture. Of course they can. They can do anything. They're the new super beings, aren't they? That would certainly explain why they keep killing whole crews of researchers. Bitterness does not become you, Beckmer, Trialpha chided him. It is unprofessional. Our son will not return, and this human was not responsible. Have the Directorate made a determination yet? They are still conferring, Beckmer said, his bitterness clearly unmitigated. You can imagine the stir that this has made. Some are calling for extermination, while others are calling for further experimentation. All of them want to know where we are. And have you told them? Trialpha asked. Of course not, Beckmer replied sharply. If they send an inspection team before this salvage operation is complete, we may lose all rights over it. You say the human wants to help? Register his physiology with the weaponry and assign him a weapon. The planet below us is rich with fauna, and quite frankly, he'll be one of the most dangerous things on it. He can hunt for his food. That is considerably barbaric, Trialpha said. I suppose it fits. Who will you have take him down there? Unlike Earth, it has not been subjected to development. It's all jungles, forests, and fields. Beckmer paused. He did not want to go, and he didn't want to send any of his crew down to a death world. Send the Gowan, he finally said. I don't like the look of him, and if they both die, I'll sleep better. Cheer piloted the landing capsule with care, trying to aim for a relatively flat piece of land that was unlikely to immediately destroy them. Beside him sat the human they'd all been surprised to discover was a fellow member of their soldiering group, although Cheer hadn't yet had much to say to him. Their initial introductions had started with the human asking him if he was some kind of raccoon, and it hadn't exactly improved. At least the human hadn't decided to pick a fight with him. Unlike Shu, who resided on his homeworld, this one did look dangerous. Right now the human was busy peering down at the world below, quietly singing something about building a city on rock and roll. Conscientious advice on proper foundations put into song, perhaps? And not paying too much attention to Cheer. Being ignored by the human was something that made Cheer feel something between annoyance and relief. So you eat meat, yeah? The human finally said. He was still looking out of the viewing window, but unless he was talking to himself, and Cheer wouldn't have been all that surprised, he was talking to Cheer. I do, yes, Cheer confirmed. He wasn't sure where the human was going with this. I also eat vegetation. I am an omnivore, if that translates. The human barked something that Cheer guessed was a laugh. Yeah, mate, that translates. Trialpha says you don't eat much, though. I guess that's why you all do a decent impression of stick figures. Is that an insult? Cheer asked, genuinely confused. It certainly hadn't sounded very flattering, but the human had said it in a tone that seemed good-natured. The human grinned at him, baring his teeth in a way that Cheer had been educated to perceive as friendly, rather than incredibly hostile. Nah, mate, just talking shit. Just talking shit? Cheer wasn't completely up to speed on human physiology, but he was fairly certain that they did not eject fecal matter from their mouths. I do not think your kind excretes from its mouth, he said dubiously. The human looked at him a moment before breaking out into more laughter. Mate, he said, catching a breath, you've obviously never had to deal with some of our glorious leaders. Cheer motioned that he understood, even though he wasn't anywhere near sure that he actually did. I take it that you were not one of these glorious leaders? The human shook his head. Not me, mate. I just go where they tell me and fuck shit up. Speaking of which, what the hell does this thing fire? I don't see any ammunition. Ammunition? Cheer asked, looking at the kinetic gun that had been shaped to fit the human's physical configuration. It runs on energy. This is the primary weapon distributed to soldiers under any government. It fires a powerful blast of kinetic force. The human looked at the weapon he was holding. No shit. No shit, Cheer repeated, starting to get the feel for the human's way of talking. The bigger versions can really fuck shit up. I think I was shot by one before, the human said. It was fuckloads bigger, though. Hurt like hell. Your kind is unusually resilient to such weaponry, Cheer said. I have heard news of a human who is the terror of the battlefield. There were stories of this human battling several Vulza at once. What the fuck's a Vulza? The human asked. Cheer described the great winged lizard with some poetic license. He'd never actually seen one in person. He had been that lucky in life, at least. But he'd seen video feeds and static images of the beasts. So, some kind of space dragon? The human asked. You're pulling my fucking leg. I haven't touched you, Cheer replied sharply, before realizing that this was yet another of the human's turns of phrase. I am being truthful. The human's face took on a look of contemplative enthusiasm. Are there any of the things down there? Cheer shook with shock. I would hope not. These weapons will be of no use against a Vulza. You might as well resort to bare-handed combat for all these will do you. Right, said the human, going quiet. It seemed to Cheer that he had come to some kind of decision. Adrian had come to a decision. These guns sucked and he needed something better. Just about anything would do, and he thought that if he had a bit of time with a lathe and one or two of these weapons, he could come up with something really special. He had been a saboteur and, by necessity, an engineer during his time in the Defense Force. And now that he was getting a feel for the technology, he was seeing a lot of disappointing shortcomings. Shortcomings that made him as giddy as a schoolboy to solve. He also wanted to kill one of these dragons. He was fairly sure he could engineer a weapon to shoot a spear at extremely high velocities. He might even be able to make a semi-automatic version given time, maybe with high explosive armor-piercing heads. He giggled. The possibilities seemed endless. He was getting ahead of himself, however. The raccoon guy, Cheer, was his pilot to the surface of the world below, but he had been instructed to stay within the landing ship as much as possible, and to return if any danger threatened it. It was up to Adrian to get his own food for the next 2 weeks, and Triafa had gone so far as to give him some kind of alien esky that, from what he can understand, stored food without needing to freeze it by stopping time when the lid was closed. Good enough for food, he supposed, but rubbish at getting your beers nice and cold. The landing ship made an almost imperceptible touchdown in what Adrian would have described as an idyllic meadow. Perfect picnic weather in a flat field amidst rolling hills of blue-tinged grass, broken only by the occasional stand of purple-leaved trees. A crystalline blue lake would have added greatly to the effect, but the best it had to offer was a winding, half-full river with muddy shores. We need to be careful out here, Cheer said, plainly worried. Adrian looked out of the view window and back at Cheer. Are you fucking kidding me? Cheer shook his head, having quickly learned to perform the gesture. Right then, Adrian said, duly warned. He waited for the door to open and they stepped out into the death world. Time to go gun down some delightful bunny rabbits.